Brazil delivers a serious blow to the United States. This is an event that many tried not to speak about openly until the very last moment, but which has now become impossible to ignore. Latin America no longer intends to play by Washington's rules. Brazil, the largest economy in the region, has openly sided with China in its confrontation with the United States. According to reports published by several reputable outlets, the Financial Times, the South China Morning Post, and Brazil's Folha de São Paulo, President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has held a series of closed-door meetings in recent weeks with senior Chinese officials, including a personal conversation with Chinese President Xi Jinping. The main topic was the creation of a new financial mechanism among BRICS countries that would allow them to gradually abandon the dollar in international transactions. Insiders within Brazil's foreign ministry claim that Lula told Xi directly that the era of the dollar is coming to an end and that Brazil is ready to be part of this new world. According to sources, this statement provoked a restrained but symbolically important reaction in Beijing. They say China sees Brazil not merely as a partner, but as a strategic ally capable of becoming a key bridgehead in Latin America for promoting the yuan. However, Chinese officials are still acting cautiously, aware that an open confrontation with the United States could be too costly, especially amid the ongoing trade war and the upcoming presidential election in America. Nevertheless, Brazil's move has already had the effect of a diplomatic earthquake. According to Reuters, Washington was deeply concerned by Lula's declaration of support for China's de-dollarization initiatives. The White House fears that Argentina, Chile, and Peru could soon follow Brazil's example, which could sharply weaken the dollar's position in the Western Hemisphere. Analysts at the Brookings Institution note that for the first time since the Cold War, Latin America is beginning to drift toward a new economic bloc led by Beijing. According to Bloomberg, members of the Trump administration have already started developing a package of retaliatory measures against Brazil, including potential restrictions on exports of Brazilian steel, aluminum, and agricultural products. These measures, envisioned by U.S. economists, are intended to pressure Brazil's economy and force Lula to reconsider his alignment with China. But in Brasilia, the situation is viewed differently. Anti-American sentiment is growing inside the country. Local media are actively discussing the words of Economy Minister Fernando Haddad, who stated that the United States is no longer a reliable partner and that Brazil must learn to live without external dictates. Amid this rhetoric, relations between the two nations are rapidly deteriorating. American analysts are already warning that Brazil could become for the United States what Cuba once was in the 1960s, a center of alternative political and economic influence, but this time under Beijing's flag. According to a leaked report from the U.S. National Security Council cited by Politico, discussions within the Trump administration increasingly revolve around the idea of temporarily freezing certain trade agreements with Brazil and revisiting military cooperation. Meanwhile, Chinese companies are rapidly expanding their presence in the Brazilian market. Over the past year, investments from China in Brazilian infrastructure have grown by more than 40%, according to analysts at Caixin Global. China is financing the construction of railways, ports, energy facilities, and even fifth-generation mobile networks. Most notably, these deals bypass American corporations that only recently dominated the region. Companies such as Huawei, Sinopec, and BYD are openly stating that Latin America has become their new strategic priority. Against this backdrop, Lula's statement at an economic forum in São Paulo was particularly symbolic. The world cannot depend on a single currency. If China, Russia, India, and South Africa are already creating new trade mechanisms, Brazil must be among them. These words instantly spread across global news agencies. The Wall Street Journal, citing sources in the U.S. Treasury Department, reported that Washington perceived this as a direct act of betrayal. One official, who requested anonymity, stated that Brazil is making a dangerous choice and playing with fire. Experts from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace believe that in the coming years, Brazil will become a testing ground for a new global financial architecture, in which the yuan will gradually displace the dollar from trade operations, especially if Venezuela and Bolivia join the process, as both countries have already expressed support for Lula's and Beijing's initiative. According to the Brazilian outlet Estadão, in September, several technical meetings were held between the central banks of China and Brazil to discuss the possibility of direct yuan clearing. If this happens, Brazil will become the first country in the Western Hemisphere to open such a channel, a move that effectively erases the dollar's monopoly in the region. The American media are reacting sharply. Fox Business reports that Trump has instructed his Economic Council to prepare an emergency report on the risks of losing U.S. strategic influence in Latin America. According to the network, the report is to be presented in early November, coinciding with the date when the 100% tariffs against China are set to take effect. Washington fears that when China comes under pressure from American tariffs, Brazil will lend its support by opening its markets to Chinese goods and technologies. Behind the scenes at the United Nations, possible consequences are already being discussed. A European diplomat told Le Monde that if Brazil truly abandons the dollar in favor of the yuan, it will mark the beginning of the end of American financial hegemony. Former IMF head Dominique Strauss-Kahn expressed a similar view in an interview with Der Spiegel, stressing that key developing nations are tired of dollar dependency and that what Lula is doing is a signal to others that the time for change has come. Meanwhile, a crisis of perception is brewing within the United States itself. Republican members of Congress accuse the White House of outplaying itself, starting a tariff war with China, but in the process provoking a loss of influence in Latin America. At a session of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, a statement was made that quickly spread across social media. "We are losing the continent we once considered our backyard." All this coincided with a new BRICS initiative that few had spoken about publicly. At a closed summit in Beijing, according to Nikkei Asia, representatives from China, India, Brazil, and Russia agreed to establish an international payment platform based on the digital yuan. This instrument will allow member states to conduct transactions without SWIFT and without using the dollar. Although there have been no official announcements yet, analysts say Brazil is expected to be the first country to test this system. Thus, before the eyes of the entire world, a new economic order is taking shape, with Brazil emerging as one of its main players. For the United States, this is a troubling signal. If in the past, Latin America was viewed by Washington as a guaranteed sphere of influence, now even the most loyal allies are beginning to wonder whether they should continue to rely on the dollar when the rest of the world is gradually moving toward the yuan. Washington already understands that Brazil has become too independent. According to the New York Times, Trump's advisors have proposed a plan of so-called soft pressure on Brazil. The essence of the plan is not to impose direct sanctions that could trigger a wave of anti-American sentiment, but to act through financial institutions, primarily the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. During a meeting at the White House, officials discussed the possibility of revising credit programs for Latin American countries dependent on dollar-denominated loans. The goal is to show Lula that the path toward de-dollarization will be costly and painful. Brazil, the country of carnival and coffee, football and the Amazon, is becoming a symbol of a new era, an era in which even the largest players of the Western Hemisphere are ready to challenge the old world order. If this process cannot be stopped, then within a few years, Latin America may become a second Eurasia, a space where Beijing, Moscow, and now Brasilia set the rules. This is precisely the scenario Washington fears most.